I'm going to need you to step outside, sir. This is your final warning." Officer Rupert Gale said it in the tone that meant the next sentence would involve handcuffs. His short-sleeved uniform tight at the bicep, one hand drifting to his belt as the midday sun carved hard shadows through the Grand Hartwell's towering skylight windows and fell across the lobby floor like a spotlight nobody had planned. Dr. Alistair Penn stood perfectly still in his navy blazer and white dress shirt, dark slacks, one hand resting on the handle of his carry-on, his name badge lanyard lying flat against his chest. The laminated one, the full-color one, the one with KEYNOTE SPEAKER printed in red across the top, and the National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference seal embossed at the bottom. It had been around his neck since he checked into this same hotel 22 hours ago. Algernon Wicks stood at the front desk in his charcoal vest and dark trousers, arms crossed, having told Officer Rupert Gale that this man had wandered in from the street and was causing a disturbance. Acclaimed Dorothea Stanwick, pearl necklace, cream blazer, white slacks, was actively confirming with a nod from the velvet lobby chairs. 300 physicians stood at the registration tables 20 feet away. Every single one of them could read the lanyard from where they were standing. Nobody had thought to tell the officer what it said. "Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background." The Grand Hartwell Hotel was not subtle about its ambitions. Its lobby ceiling rose 40 feet above the marble floor, and the skylight panels that ran its full length flooded every corner with clean, unrelenting midday light. There were no dark corners in the Grand Hartwell. There was nowhere to hide anything. That was, in some quiet and devastating way, the first thing Dr. Alistair Penn noticed about the situation he was standing in the center of. It was happening in perfect visibility, under the most honest light in the building, and still no one was saying what they could plainly see. He had arrived at this lobby the previous morning without incident, checked in at the front desk, taken his key card, ridden the elevator to the 14th floor, and spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the slides he had spent 8 months constructing. 8 months. The numbers surfaced in his mind with a particular clarity now, the way precise numbers always did when he was managing stress. A habit from the operating room, from the years when the number that mattered was a heart rate, a pressure reading. The countdown before a procedure crossed from salvageable to irreversible. 8 months of research compressed into 52 minutes of presentation. He had given keynote addresses before. He had never given one at a conference organized specifically around his body of work, and the weight of that distinction had kept him at his laptop until past midnight. He had put the lanyard on this morning before he left the room. That was not a detail he would normally remember. He remembered it now because it had seemed, when he clipped it over his head and checked himself in the mirror of room 1408, like a formality, a procedural courtesy, the kind of thing you wore so that the conference volunteers could identify the speakers quickly and direct them to the right room. He had not imagined it would need to serve any other function. The badge was not small. It was a full conference credential, 3 inches by 4, laminated and stiff, with the kind of print quality that came from a professional design team and a real production budget. His name was in block letters. His title was in block letters beneath that. The red banner at the top read "Keynote Speaker" in a font you could read from across a hotel lobby without any particular effort. It was lying flat against his chest, between the lapels of his navy blazer, and it was catching the light from the skylight the same way everything else in the lobby was catching it. Clearly, without ambiguity, without shadow. Dr. Alistair Penn breathed in once, slowly, and kept his hand on the carry-on handle. 31 years. The thought arrived not as pride, but as orientation, the way a navigator checks a fixed point on the horizon before adjusting course. 31 years in cardiology. which meant 31 years of delivering news that broke people, 31 years of finding language precise enough to carry weight without crushing the person holding it. 31 years of standing in rooms where the stakes were higher than any room he was currently standing in and keeping his hands steady. He had learned stillness the way surgeons learn it. Not as a performance, but as a discipline. Not calm because the situation did not matter. Calm because the situation required it. He was aware, with a clinician's detachment, of exactly what was happening and exactly why. He had walked through this lobby 20 minutes ago, returning from the hotel's business center where the printer had produced a clean final copy of his speaker notes. He had been crossing toward the elevator bank when Algernon Wicks had stepped out from behind the front desk and asked in a lowered voice that carried a particular kind of authority whether Dr. Penn was a registered guest. Dr. Penn had indicated his lanyard. Algernon Wicks had looked at his face and not at the badge. The conversation had escalated in the way these conversations escalated, not through shouting, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the steady application of institutional certainty against the simple truth of a man standing in a hotel lobby where he was, by every measure of evidence available, entirely supposed to be. Officer Rupert Gale had arrived 6 minutes later, summoned by a call Dr. Penn had not heard placed. He was broad across the shoulders, short-sleeved uniform crisp in the midday light, a man of approximately 40 who carried his authority in the set of his jaw and the precise way his right hand rested near his belt. He had listened to Algernon Wicks for 30 seconds and then turned to Dr. Penn with the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was now conducting a formality. The final warning had arrived after 2 prior warnings that Dr. Penn had not raised his voice to contest, had not argued against, had met with the same measured tone he was using now to manage the rising heat in his chest. That was not fear and was not anger, but was something older and more specific than either. He had 17 published studies. The most recent one, released 4 months ago in a peer-reviewed cardiology journal with a circulation of 90,000 subscribers, had been cited 6 times already. He had 2 NIH research grants running concurrently. He had a commendation from the Army Medical Corps that sat in a drawer at his home because he had never been the kind of man who kept his credentials on the wall, which was perhaps relevant information for anyone attempting to determine whether his presence in a hotel lobby constituted a threat. He had not mentioned any of this. He had offered his badge. He had offered his room key. He had stated his name, his title, and the reason he was at the Grand Hartwell on this particular Tuesday in November. He had done this without elevation, without performance, without the kind of escalating insistence that a man in his position would have been entirely within his rights to employ. He had stood still because stillness was the most precise tool available to him, the one that left the situation exactly as it was, fully visible, fully legible, fully damning on its own terms. 20 feet away, the registration tables stretched the full width of the lobby's eastern corridor entrance. They had been set up overnight. White tablecloths, printed name cards in alphabetical holders, lanyards stacked in neat rows for the physicians who had not yet collected their credentials. Banners on either side of the entrance showed the conference logo and the words National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference in the same institutional font as the laminated badge on Dr. Penn's chest. The registration volunteers were no longer entirely focused on their clipboards. Several physicians in the growing crowd had turned toward the lobby, drawn by the particular quality of silence that accumulates around a scene that has not yet broken but is building toward something. None of them had spoken. Dr. Penn understood that too. There was a specific geometry to a public confrontation involving a uniformed officer and a hotel manager presenting a unified institutional front, and the geometry was not simple to disrupt from the outside, particularly when the outside meant stepping directly into the space between a badge and a belt. He was not going to ask them to do it. He was not going to look at them in a way that invited rescue. He was going to stand exactly where he was, hand on his carry-on, lanyard flat against his chest, and let the scene be what it was. He thought about the keynote. 52 minutes. The first slide was a map of the United States with cardiovascular mortality rates overlaid by zip code, a heat map of preventable death, and he had planned to open by asking the room a question that had no comfortable answer. He was going to deliver it tonight. He knew that with the same certainty he knew his own heart rate, which was currently elevated but within an entirely manageable range. Officer Rupert Gale took one step forward. His hand came off his belt and moved toward Dr. Alistair Penn's left forearm. With the slow, deliberate motion of someone exercising authority they have been told is appropriate and have not yet been given any reason to question. His fingers closed around the sleeve of the navy blazer. The Grand Hartwell's lobby, flooded with midday light from 40 feet of skylight glass, with 300 physicians at the registration tables 20 feet away, with the conference banners flanking the corridor entrance, and the laminated badge hanging flat and undeniable against a man's chest, went completely, perfectly quiet, and every physician at the registration table turned to look. Algernon Wicks stepped out from behind the front desk. It was a deliberate movement, not a hurried one. He adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal vest as he came around the polished mahogany edge, and he walked toward Dr. Alistair Penn with the measured stride of a man who believed, completely and without question, that he was the most important person in any room he entered. He stopped at a distance close enough to be intimate and far enough to be condescending, a distance that communicated, without words, that he was not speaking to an equal. He lowered his voice. "Your kind," Algernon Wicks said, each word placed with surgical care, as if he were explaining something obvious to someone slow, "always skips out." The words landed in the lobby air like something physical. Dr. Alistair Penn did not move. He stood with his carry-on handle still extended in his right hand, the laminated badge lying flat against the chest of his navy blazer, the red keynote speaker designation facing outward in clean capital letters, visible from the registration tables 20 feet away, where 300 physicians continued their slow comprehension of what they were witnessing. The midday light through the Grand Hartwell skylight fell in a clean white sheet across the marble floor between the two men, and it illuminated everything: the badge, the vest, the hand Officer Rupert Gale had placed on Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm, with the unsparing clarity of a courtroom overhead. Dr. Alistair Penn held his composure the way a man holds a very full glass, completely still, controlled at the center. Algernon Wicks turned slightly toward Officer Rupert Gale, his voice shifting into the practiced register of a professional making a formal complaint. He explained that the Grand Hartwell had experienced repeated difficulties during large-scale events. Individuals from the surrounding street, he said, would enter through the main lobby during the confusion of conference check-ins, pocketing items from registration tables, helping themselves to catered refreshments, occasionally lifting unattended luggage from bellman carts. It happened, he said, more often than guests would assume. Furthermore, he added, with the particular confidence of a man constructing fiction with familiar materials, there had been a reported disturbance the prior evening. A man matching this individual's description had been observed loitering near the hotel's secondary entrance on Carmichael Street. The night staff had filed an incident report. Every word was fabricated. There was no incident report. There was no prior evening disturbance. There was no matching description on file anywhere in the Grand Hartwell's security records. These things did not exist, and Algernon Wicks knew they did not exist, and he said them anyway, in a voice of quiet institutional authority to a police officer who was listening with his hand still on a black man's forearm in a lobby where 300 physicians were beginning to migrate toward the front desk. Celeste Drummond, stationed behind the front desk, heard every word. She was 26 years old and had worked the Grand Hartwell's front desk for 3 years. She knew the incident report database. She had checked it that morning, as she did every morning, as part of her shift handover routine. There was no disturbance on Carmichael Street. There was no prior evening complaint, And she knew, with the absolute certainty of a person who looks a man in the face and slides a keycard across a marble counter, that she had checked Dr. Alistair Penn into room 1008 herself. At 9:47 the previous morning, she had asked him how long he'd been traveling. He'd said since before sunrise, coming in from Baltimore. She had told him the ballroom setup would be complete by noon, and that the conference coordinator had left an envelope for him at the desk. He had thanked her by name, having read it from her badge, and she had felt the small warmth of that, the way you do when someone pays attention. She stood behind the desk now with her hands flat on the counter surface, and she looked at Algernon Wicks fabricating an incident report that did not exist, and she said nothing. She told herself it was because she wasn't certain. But she was certain. She told herself it was because the situation was still unfolding. But it had already unfolded. The truth was simpler and less flattering. She was afraid of what it would cost her to speak, and that fear was large enough, for the moment, to hold her mouth closed. Near the luggage cart by the east wall, Terence Holloway stood in his orange vest over a white collared shirt and dark trousers. A brass luggage cart handle, loose in his grip. He had been a bellman at the Grand Hartwell for 11 years, longer than Algernon Wicks had been general manager, though Algernon Wicks would not have been able to tell you Terence Holloway's name without checking a staff roster. Terence Holloway had carried Dr. Alistair Penn's luggage from the taxi stand to the front desk the previous morning. He had seen the badge then. He had seen the conference registration envelope. He had recognized the name from the hotel's marquee, which had been displaying it in white block letters on the exterior facade for 6 days. His expression now was carefully, professionally neutral. His hands on the cart handle were very still. There are moments in a public space when people who know the truth choose the size of their courage. Terence Holloway was measuring his. He was not yet finished measuring. Dorothea Stanwick rose from the velvet chair. She rose with the deliberate grace of a woman who understood that her entrance into any situation was itself a statement. Her orange blouse was pressed to a smooth finish, her navy slacks carrying a crisp center crease, her pearl necklace catching the skylight as she turned. 11 years of Grand Hartwell Platinum membership, 11 years of suite upgrades and priority reservations, and the particular warmth that Algernon Wicks reserved exclusively for guests whose credit profiles he had personally reviewed. She crossed toward the front desk cluster, with her chin level and her voice prepared. She said she had attended the Grand Hartwell's flagship conferences for many years, and she did not recognize this individual from any prior event. She said it the way one states a fact, the way one reads from a ledger, as though her recognition were a credential, as though her 11 years of luxury hospitality spending constituted an authority over who belonged in a space she did not own, had never owned, and would never own, as though not being known to Dorothea Stanwick were, itself, a form of evidence. Dr. Alistair Penn looked at her. He did not look at her the way one looks at an aggressor. He looked at her the way a physician looks at a chart, fully, completely, without flinching, cataloging what he found there. Then he turned back to Algernon Wicks, and he spoke for the first time. His voice was measured, precise, not raised, not shaking. It had the quality of still water, surface absolutely calm, everything happening underneath at a depth Algernon Wicks was not equipped to navigate. He said his name. He said his title. He said he was the keynote speaker for the National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference, the event currently occupying the Grand Hartwell's registration hall, the event for which the hotel's exterior marquee had been displaying his name for 6 consecutive days. He raised his left hand and touched the laminated badge on his chest, not defensively, not frantically, but with the same unhurried precision with which he would indicate a specific data point on a projected slide. And he suggested that if there was any uncertainty remaining, Algernon Wicks was welcome to pull the conference registration record, the room assignment record under the name Penn, the pre-authorization on file with the hotel's billing department, or to simply walk 12 steps to his left and read the marquee through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling glass facade. He said all of this in approximately 45 seconds. Algernon Wicks did not look at the badge. His eyes did not travel to the badge at any point during Dr. Alistair Penn's statement. Not for a fraction of a second. He looked at Dr. Alistair Penn's face, and something moved across his expression that was not confusion and was not doubt. It was something older and simpler and uglier than either of those things. And then he turned to Officer Rupert Gale, with his chin up and his voice freshly clipped, and he said the man was being combative. Combative. The word hit the lobby like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward through 300 physicians who were no longer pretending to look at their registration packets, who had stopped mid-sentence and mid-movement, who were standing at the tables 20 feet away and watching a man with a keynote speaker badge be called combative for stating his own name. Officer Rupert Gale adjusted his grip on Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm. He did not release it. Across the lobby at the entrance to the registration hall, mounted on a brushed aluminum bracket at a height of 7 feet, Fatima Diallo's conference AV camera completed its slow programmed rotation. It had been cycling through its preset arc every 4 minutes since 9 a.m., designed to capture atmospheric footage of the registration process for the conference's official documentation package. Physicians collecting their materials, colleagues reuniting, the general textures of a professional gathering. Its field of view was wide, its resolution was sharp, its live stream connection was active and running, and had been since the panel 2 rooms over began its opening remarks 40 minutes earlier. The camera settled on the front desk. It settled on Officer Rupert Gale's short-sleeved uniform, and the hand fastened around Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm. It settled on Algernon Wicks in his charcoal vest. It settled on the badge. It settled on everything. Nobody in the lobby noticed the camera move. The counter in the bottom left corner of the stream window, visible only to Fatima Diallo on her coordinator's tablet in the AV room 2 corridors away, read 47 concurrent viewers, conference staff, mostly. A few early remote attendees, a graduate student in Toronto watching while she ate lunch. The number meant nothing yet. In 38 minutes, it would mean everything. But the camera was rolling now, and the badge was visible now, and Algernon Wicks's voice was on the audio feed now, and the word combative hung in the Grand Hartwell's skylit lobby air like something that would never fully leave it. Dr. Alistair Penn stood still. He had served in 2 combat deployments. He had performed emergency cardiac intervention under conditions that would have liquefied the composure of most men in this room. He had stood in worse places than this and held steadier than this, and the knowledge of that was not armor against what was happening. It was simply the ground he stood on, solid and old and entirely his. He waited. The first thing Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng noticed when she pushed through the Grand Hartwell's main entrance was the quality of the silence. She had attended 41 medical conferences in her career. She knew the particular acoustic texture of a registration hall at full capacity, the layered hum of 200 conversations running simultaneously, badge lanyards snapping against name tags, rolling bags wheeling across marble, someone laughing too loudly near the coffee station. She had been hearing that sound for 20 years. It was the sound of her profession gathering itself. This was not that sound. The Grand Hartwell's lobby, swathed in midday light pouring through its wide skylight panels, had gone still in the way that lobbies go still only when something has happened that nobody knows how to process yet. Renata felt it the moment the door swung shut behind her rolling bag. She felt it before she saw anything. She stood at the entrance, her green blazer catching the overhead fluorescent wash from the lobby's perimeter lighting, her cream blouse bright against it, her dark trousers cutting a clean line down to her heels. And she scanned the room the way she had been trained to scan rooms, quickly, methodically, looking for the thing that did not belong. She found it in 4 seconds. 20 feet from the front desk, a man stood with his back partially turned to her. She knew those shoulders. She had watched those shoulders cross a stage in Houston, in Baltimore, in Copenhagen. She had sat 3 seats away from those shoulders at a NIH roundtable in 2019 and watched their owner dismantle a flawed study design with 7 sentences and a smile. She knew the way Dr. Alistair Penn stood, the particular stillness of a man who had decided, long before any confrontation reached him, exactly how he intended to behave inside it. She also saw the hand. Officer Rupert Gale's right hand was closed around Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm. The grip was not gentle. Gale's short-sleeved uniform stretched across his arm as he held it. His jaw was set. His stance said this was already decided. Renata Osei-Boateng stopped pulling her rolling bag. Then she crossed the lobby in 12 seconds. She counted them later when she was trying to explain to a journalist how she had felt in that moment, and she counted 12. She did not run. Running would have suggested panic, and panic was not what the moment needed. What the moment needed was someone walking with absolute certainty in a direction. And that was something Renata Osei-Boateng had spent her entire career learning how to do. From where he stood, Dr. Alistair Penn heard the footsteps before he saw her face. He had been tracking sounds since Gale's hand closed on his forearm. The murmur from the registration hall 20 feet away, the low exchange between Algernon Wicks and someone on the desk phone, the particular held breath quality of 300 physicians who had stopped moving and started watching. He had been filing each sound away with the same calm he brought to a 12-hour surgical case, the same deliberate steadiness that had gotten him through 2 combat deployments and 31 years of other people's emergencies. He recognized Renata's stride without turning. He allowed himself one slow exhale. She stopped 18 inches from Officer Rupert Gale and addressed him directly. Not Algernon Wicks. Not the room. Her voice carried without being raised. The voice of someone who had run grand rounds at 6 different teaching hospitals and was accustomed to being heard clearly. Officer, I need you to release this man's arm. My name is Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng. I am the president of the National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference, which is currently being hosted in this building. The man you are holding is Dr. Alistair Penn. He is the keynote speaker for this conference. He is a guest of this hotel. And the laminated badge hanging around his neck says exactly that. Gale looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition, not apology, but a recalculation. He did not release the forearm. Algernon Wicks stepped forward from the desk. He had removed the vest at some point in the last 2 minutes, though no one had noticed when. He stood in his pressed white shirt with his arms at his sides and his voice perfectly controlled, and he said, "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but it's possible you may also be confused about—" "I am not confused." Renata said it the way a wall says stop. "I have known this man for 19 years. We were both fellows at Johns Hopkins in 2006. I invited him personally to deliver this keynote 8 months ago. The conference program, with his photograph and biography, has been available on our website since January. I am asking you right now to look at the badge around his neck. Look at the conference banner on your own registration table and tell me what you see." Wicks did not look at the badge. He did not look at the banner. He looked at a point slightly above Renata's left shoulder and said that security protocol during large events was a matter for management to determine, and that he had made the determination he felt was appropriate. The lobby went a degree colder. From the edge of the physician crowd, which had now migrated fully into the lobby, 300 cardiologists, hospitalists, and researchers, standing in a loose arc that no one had organized but everyone had joined. A figure separated itself from the group and walked forward. Dr. Edmund Nakamura moved with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had testified before Senate subcommittees and did not particularly frighten easily. His gray suit was precisely pressed. His white shirt had no wrinkle in it. He reached into his inside breast pocket and produced a credential wallet, which he opened and held up without theatrics. "I'm Dr. Edmund Nakamura," he said. "Senior Program Officer, National Institutes of Health. This is my federal identification." He let Gale see it. He let Wicks see it. He did not put it away. "Dr. Penn and I have collaborated on 2 NIH-funded cardiac research initiatives. The most recent concluded 18 months ago. I attended his presentation at the American Heart Association's annual meeting last November. I have his cell phone number in my contacts." He paused. "I would suggest very strongly that someone here look at the registration record for this hotel." Algernon Wicks's jaw tightened. The room was watching him. He could feel 300 pairs of eyes, though he had not looked at them directly since the crowd moved in from the registration hall. He said nothing for 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds too long. Behind the front desk, Celeste Drummond had not moved for 6 minutes. She had checked Dr. Alistair Penn in the previous morning at 11:47 a.m. She remembered it precisely because he had thanked her by name. He had read her name tag and used it, and because he had asked whether the hotel's housekeeping team had a supervisor he could leave a note for regarding how well his room had been prepared. She had told him she would deliver it herself. She had meant it. She had stood behind this desk since the confrontation began and watched Algernon Wicks escalate a situation that she had known was wrong from the first sentence. She had watched Officer Gale arrive. She had watched the grip close on Dr. Penn's arm. She had opened her mouth twice and closed it both times because Algernon Wicks had placed her on a performance review 4 months ago, and she knew exactly what another incident on her file would mean. But Dr. Nakamura had just produced a federal ID, and Dr. Osei Boateng was standing 19 years of friendship in front of a man she was clearly not confused about. And the badge was right there, had always been right there, its red block letters visible from any point within the lobby's natural light radius. Celeste Drummond said, "He's a registered guest." It came out quieter than she intended, a half step above a whisper. She felt Wicks's attention shift toward her before she finished the sentence. She said it again, clearly this time, loud enough for Officer Gale to hear, loud enough for the first 2 rows of physicians. "He's a registered guest. I checked him in myself yesterday morning. Room 1408. His confirmation number is in the system. I processed the reservation." The lobby did not erupt. Lobbies do not erupt. What the lobby did was undergo a collective, simultaneous, almost physical shift in atmosphere, as if the pressure in the room had changed and everyone's ears were adjusting to it at once. Algernon Wicks turned to face Celeste Drummond. What crossed his face in that moment was not anger exactly. It was something that lived just under anger, the expression of a man who has been contradicted by someone he believed would not dare and who has not yet processed what that means for every assumption underneath his authority. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Celeste." Just the name, nothing after it. The lobby went cold, in the way that lobbies go cold when a supervisor says an employee's name and means something other than the name. Dr. Alistair Penn looked at Celeste Drummond across the front desk. She was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. Her knuckles showed the effort of it. She met his eyes for 1 second, and in that second she did not look away, and he did not look away either. And the thing that passed between them did not require translation. Near the lobby's eastern wall, at a low side table arranged for guest use with outlets and a flat surface and a direct view of everything that had just happened, Nathaniel Voss set his coffee down, opened his laptop, and began to type. He was a national medical correspondent. He had been in this lobby on an unrelated assignment covering the conference's opening for a health policy publication, and he had been watching this unfold for 11 minutes without touching his keyboard, because he was a precise man who did not begin writing until he was certain of what the story was. He was now certain. Across town, in a hotel conference room rented for AV coordination, Fatima Diallo was watching her laptop with both hands pressed flat on the table in front of her. The registration hall's live stream had been running for 4 hours. The counter had read 300 viewers at 10 a.m. and had fluctuated gently since. It now read 1,214. She refreshed the page. 2,840. She refreshed again. 5,103. Fatima Diallo sat very still, reading a number that was still climbing, and said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say. Nobody spoke first. That was the thing that would stay with everyone in that lobby for the rest of their professional lives. Not the accusation, not the grip on the forearm, not even the marquee itself. It was the silence that followed the pointing, the moment when a third-year resident from Memphis named Dr. Yolanda Fitch, standing near the back of the registration crowd with a lanyard half-looped around her neck, raised one hand and pointed toward the floor-to-ceiling glass facade of the Grand Hartwell's front entrance, and every single person in that lobby turned to look at the same time, and nobody said a word. Through the glass, in the clean flat light of a Tuesday afternoon, the hotel's exterior marquee burned white against the gray stone facade. 8-inch letters, no ambiguity, no fine print, no possibility of misreading from 20 feet away or 200. Welcome, Dr. Alistair Penn, keynote speaker, National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference, Grand Ballroom, 7 p.m. Officer Rupert Gale saw it. His eyes moved to the glass, tracked the letters left to right, then stopped. His right hand was still wrapped around Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm, the grip he had tightened 3 minutes ago when Algernon Wicks had used the word combative. And now that hand did not move, but it also did not tighten. It simply existed, suspended between the action it had been and the action it no longer had any justification to be. Algernon Wicks saw it. He was standing 2 feet to Officer Rupert Gale's left, charcoal vest, white shirt, hands no longer crossed over his chest because he had uncrossed them somewhere in the last 30 seconds without noticing, and now they hung at his sides like objects that had lost their purpose. His eyes moved to the marquee, and then his eyes moved to the badge hanging flat against Dr. Alistair Penn's chest. Keynote speaker in red block letters, the conference seal, the full name printed clearly, the badge he had looked at 3 separate times without reading it or without choosing to read it. And the distinction between those two things was the precise location of his problem. Dorothea Stanwick saw it. She had risen from the velvet chair 20 minutes ago to add her voice to Algernon Wicks's claim, and she had not sat back down since, and she stood now in her orange blouse and navy slacks near the edge of the seating area, with her pearl necklace catching the afternoon light, and her expression doing something complicated and involuntary that no amount of 11 years of platinum membership could smooth back into composure. The lobby did not erupt. That was the second thing people would remember. There were no gasps, no sudden outcries, no dramatic swelling of voices. 300 physicians gathered from cardiology practices and research hospitals and university programs in 41 states looked at the marquee, looked at Dr. Alistair Penn, looked at Officer Rupert Gale's hand on Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm, and went absolutely silent. The silence had weight. It had texture. It was the specific silence of a room full of people who have just watched a diagnosis confirm itself, who have just seen the scan results come back and show exactly what they suspected, and who are now processing not just what is true, but what it means that it took this long to say so. Dr. Alistair Penn looked at the marquee. He read it the way a man reads something he has known for a long time, Not for information, but for the particular calm that comes from being confirmed. He had spent 8 months writing that keynote. He had spent 31 years becoming the person whose name belonged on that marquee. He turned his head back from the glass and looked at Algernon Wicks, and he said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing in the English language that would accomplish more than the silence already had. Officer Rupert Gale's hand opened. It did not release dramatically. There was no gesture, no announcement. His fingers simply separated from Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm, and his arm lowered to his side, and he took one step backward, and his short-sleeved uniform and his badge and his belt and everything that was supposed to represent the unquestionable authority of his position stood very still in the overhead fluorescent light of the Grand Hartwell lobby, looking like a man who had walked through a door and found himself in the wrong building entirely. The certainty that had been in his posture 20 minutes ago, the forward lean, the squared shoulders, the hand-on-belt readiness, was gone. What replaced it was something Officer Rupert Gale would not have named as fear, because naming it would have required a clarity he was not prepared to apply to himself. But it was fear, specifically, the fear of a man who understands that every second of the last 22 minutes has been witnessed and recorded and is now being watched by 40,000 people he cannot see. Algernon Wicks started talking. That was the moment Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng, standing 6 feet away in her green blazer, would later describe to Nathaniel Voss as the most revealing 12 seconds of the entire incident, because Algernon Wicks did not apologize. He did not stop. He pivoted. His voice shifted from the clipped, managerial authority he had been using for 22 minutes into something faster and higher and significantly less composed, and he began explaining that the Grand Hartwell took the security of all its guests extremely seriously during large-scale events, that the protocols his staff had followed were standard practice for the property, that any inconvenience experienced by any guest during the execution of those protocols was deeply regrettable, and that he personally wanted to ensure that the remainder of Dr. Penn's stay reflected the hotel's genuine commitment to excellence. He said the word protocols 4 times in 30 seconds. He did not say the word sorry once. Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng had already raised her phone. She photographed Algernon Wicks mid-sentence, his mouth open, his hands moving in the gesture of a man trying to build a wall out of language. She turned and photographed the marquee through the glass facade, the full sign, the 8-inch letters, the afternoon light making every word perfectly legible. She turned again and photographed Officer Rupert Gale, standing alone near the desk, his face turned slightly away from the crowd of physicians that had migrated from the registration tables and now formed a loose, unspoken perimeter around the space where the confrontation had taken place. The perimeter was not aggressive. It was simply present. 300 physicians standing at a distance that said, without a single word, "We saw this, and we are not moving until we have seen all of it." Dorothea Stanwick had retreated, not from the lobby. There was nowhere to go that wouldn't require walking past the physician crowd, but back to the velvet chair, where she sat with her posture still perfect and her phone held at an angle that suggested she was reading something urgent, though she had not actually looked at the screen in 90 seconds. She had looked at the marquee for a long time. She had looked at the badge. She was doing, right now, the private arithmetic of a woman who has spent 11 years building a particular kind of social credibility inside a particular kind of institution, and who is beginning to understand, with the specific clarity that only comes from public error, that arithmetic has a direction, and the current direction is not in her favor. Her daughter had texted 3 times in the last 4 minutes. She had not opened the messages. At the side table near the lobby's east wall, Nathaniel Voss had not looked up from his laptop in 6 minutes. The headline was already drafted. He had written the first 3 paragraphs during the silence after the marquee, because the silence was the story. The lobby's collective recognition was more revealing than any quote he could have collected. He had the badge description. He had the marquee text, word for word. He had Dr. Renata Osei Boateng's direct statement from 5 minutes earlier. He had Officer Rupert Gale's name from the badge on his short-sleeved uniform. He had Algernon Wicks's name from the desk placard. He had been a medical journalist for 19 years, and he had never had a story construct itself this cleanly in real time. On Fatima Diallo's conference live stream, the viewer counter climbed past 40,000. Fatima was in the AV booth at the registration hall entrance, watching the number with an expression she would later describe as quietly horrified, not because of the number, but because of the realization that she had not intentionally filmed any of this. She had mounted the camera to document conference registration. The camera had simply rotated because she had programmed it to track motion in the doorway, and the motion had been this, and 40,000 people had followed the motion with her, and none of them were watching the registration process anymore. Dr. Alistair Penn reached down and picked up the handle of his carry-on bag. The motion was unhurried. He straightened his navy blazer with 2 precise adjustments, collar, lapel, and settled the KEYNOTE speaker badge flat against his chest, and he stood in the overhead light of the Grand Hartwell lobby, looking exactly as he had looked when he walked through the front entrance, composed, prepared, and entirely at home in his own presence. Algernon Wicks had stopped talking. The protocol's explanation had run out of language to stand on. Dr. Alistair Penn looked at him for a moment, without expression. Then he said, in the same measured voice he had used every time he had spoken in the last 22 minutes, the voice that had not risen, had not broken, had not done anything except remain exactly itself under every condition applied to it. I'll need the name and direct contact information for the hotel's ownership group. He did not ask it as a request. He did not say it as a threat. He said it the way a cardiologist identifies the location of a blockage, with complete diagnostic precision, no wasted motion, and the calm of a man who already knows exactly what the next step requires. Algernon Wicks's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The lobby stayed silent, and the marquee stayed lit, and the physician crowd stayed exactly where it was, and 40,000 people watched the cursor blink on Nathaniel Voss's screen as the first paragraph of the story went live. Terence Holloway had the number in his phone under a contact labeled RBS Direct. He'd saved it 14 months back, the morning after a busted heater in the East Wing left 12 guests without hot water during a February freeze. Booker Smythe had called the property himself that day, gone around the regional manager, and asked Terence to walk him through what had happened. Not Wicks, not the maintenance supervisor, Terence, because Terence was the one standing at the front entrance when the call came through. Booker Smythe liked to hear it from whoever had been closest. Terence had figured that out fast and saved the number before they hung up. He dialed it now from the service corridor behind the luggage staging area, his orange vest still buttoned, his trousers creased from 6 hours on his feet. His hands were steady. He'd been waiting for something like this, if he was being honest. Not this, exactly. Nobody could have called a decorated cardiologist standing quiet in a conference badge while a cop held his forearm in a lobby full of physicians. But something, a moment where keeping his mouth shut would mean something he couldn't talk himself out of later. He pressed call. The line rang twice. Booker Smythe picked up and said, "Terence." Not a question. He'd already seen whatever was on the screen. "Sir, you've seen it. My assistant flagged it 11 minutes ago. She watches social mentions of the property. 42,000 views when she sent it over." A pause. "Walk me through it." Terence walked him through it. The whole 22 minutes. He didn't editorialize, just told it in order. Dr. Alistair Penn through the main entrance, with a rolling carry-on and a badge with his name printed in block letters, the marquee, the silence, Penn straightening his blazer and asking Wicks, with nothing in his voice at all, for the name and contact information of the ownership group. When Terence stopped, the line was quiet for 4 seconds. "Where's Wicks?" "Lobby manager's office. About 8 minutes ago." Dr. Osi Boateng followed him in and wouldn't let the door close. Another silence, shorter. "Good. Put me on speaker in there." It took 3 minutes to get to the office, which sat behind a wood-paneled door next to the front desk. The overhead fluorescence gave the room a clinical feel. Wicks was standing near the desk in his charcoal vest and dark trousers, and whatever had held him upright as a manager for 15 years had gone out of him. He wasn't leaning. He wasn't crossing his arms either. He was just trying to take up less room. Osi Boateng stood by the doorframe in her green blazer over a cream blouse, arms folded. When Terence came in, she shifted enough to let him past. No more. The door stayed open behind him, and out in the lobby 300 physicians still hadn't moved. Terence held up his phone. "Mr. Booker Smythe, he wants to be on speaker." Wicks's face did a few things in quick succession that Terence couldn't have put names to in the moment. By the end of it, the manager's expression had gone smooth and blank again, the way it always did, though there wasn't much behind the blankness anymore. Terence set the phone on the desk and pressed speaker. Booker Smythe's voice came into the room with no warm-up. "Algernon, tell me, in precise terms, why the keynote speaker whose name is on the marquee out front was physically detained by a police officer in my lobby this afternoon." The silence after that wasn't short. It lasted long enough for Osi Boateng to uncross her arms and cross them the other way. Wicks opened his mouth. He talked about security protocols. He talked about a disturbance someone had reported the night before. He started in on a responsibility to the comfort and safety of long-standing guests. And the sentences came out slower as he went, because each one was making it worse, and some part of him was starting to catch up to that. Even while he kept talking, Booker Smythe let him run out. Then quietly he said, "Did you look at his badge, Algernon?" Algernon Wicks said nothing. What Reginald Booker Smythe did not say aloud in that office, but what existed in the institutional record of the Grand Hartwell Hotel's complaint archives, was a sequence of incidents that formed a pattern as clear and unambiguous as an artery with a 90% blockage. 7 formal complaints over 4 years, each filed by a minority conference attendee, each describing a version of the same experience, a moment of suspicion, a request for identification that was not asked of white guests in identical circumstances, a tone that communicated belonging was conditional. 6 of those complaints had been received by Algernon Wicks's office. 6 of them had been filed. None had been escalated. The 7th had been sent directly to the regional manager and had disappeared into a process review that produced no documented outcome. Dorothea Stanwick had been staying at the Grand Hartwell for 11 of those 15 years. Algernon Wicks had personally upgraded her suite to the premium corner room on the 14th floor 3 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, without a formal request and without a corresponding upgrade fee. They had lunched twice in the hotel restaurant afterward. Algernon Wicks had told himself this was relationship management. He had told himself this for 3 years. The telling had become easier each time, which is how these things always work. On the other side of the paneled door, in the lobby, Officer Rupert Gale stood near the front desk in his short-sleeved uniform, and he was alone in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. The physicians had not formed a hostile crowd around him. They had simply moved, in the organic way of people who need to breathe different air, until there was a visible radius of empty space surrounding him. Some stood in pairs speaking quietly. Some had phones raised. None were looking at him directly, which was somehow worse than if they had been. He was not being confronted. He was being excluded from the shared understanding that had settled over the room. The understanding that what had happened here was legible to every person in it, and that it had been filmed, and that it was already somewhere else. Deputy Chief Leonard Voss walked through the hotel's main entrance at 18 minutes past the hour, moving through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors into the full overhead light of the lobby. blue jacket buttoned over dark trousers, his expression arranged into the specific, careful neutrality of a senior officer arriving at a situation that has already migrated beyond his capacity to contain it through presence alone. His department's social media monitoring unit had flagged the live stream at 31,000 viewers. By the time his car reached the Grand Hartwell Circular Drive, it was at 58,000. He had made 2 phone calls in transit. Neither had made him feel better. He found Officer Rupert Gale near the front desk and crossed toward him with a measured pace, nodding once to the room in general, acknowledging no one specifically. He and Officer Rupert Gale spoke in voices low enough that the conversation carried no further than the 2 of them. What Leonard Voss said was brief and without decoration. He asked Officer Rupert Gale to describe the basis on which he had made physical contact with the individual. He asked whether Officer Rupert Gale had seen the individual's conference badge at any point prior to making contact. He asked whether the claim of a prior reported disturbance had been verified through dispatch before any action was taken. He did not ask these questions with anger. He asked them with the weary and exacting attention of a man who was already composing, in some functional part of his mind, the documentation that would follow this conversation. Officer Rupert Gale's answers were short. They did not add up to anything that Leonard Voss could use. Near the glass facade, the natural light from outside fell across the hotel marquee's reflection on the polished lobby floor. 8-inch letters reversed, but still entirely readable. Leonard Voss looked at it once and returned his attention to Officer Rupert Gale and said nothing further. In the lobby manager's office, Reginald Booker Smythe had finished with Algernon Wicks, which was apparent because he had stopped asking questions. The silence on the line had changed quality. It was no longer an interrogative silence. It was something closer to a verdict being allowed to settle before anyone moved. Then Reginald Booker Smythe spoke again, and his voice had shifted into something quieter and more deliberate, the register of a man who understood that the next conversation he had would matter more than any he had conducted in this building in the preceding decade. "I need someone," Reginald Booker Smythe said, "to find Dr. Penn and ask him if he is willing to speak with me directly." Dr. Renata Osei-Boteng was already turning toward the door before he finished the sentence. The side corridor off the Grand Hartwell's main lobby was narrow and unhurried, the kind of hallway that existed between purposes, not quite a back passage, not quite a public thoroughfare, but something in between. A single tall window dominated the far wall, and the afternoon light came through it cleanly, without apology, falling in a broad pale column across the carpeted floor, and climbing the opposite wall in a warm, unbroken sheet. Dr. Alistair Penn stood inside that column of light, his navy blazer straight, his white dress shirt still crisp despite everything the last hour had deposited on top of it. His conference lanyard hung against his chest. The laminated badge caught the light the same way it had caught it in the lobby. Keynote speaker in red block letters. The conference seal, his full name without abbreviation, and no one here was pretending not to see it. He held the phone to his ear with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had held instruments over open chests in field conditions and never once let his hand tremble. Reginald Booker Smythe's voice came through measured and deliberate, the voice of a man who had built enough to understand exactly what its demolition looked like, and who was presently watching a significant portion of his institution's reputation dissolve in real time across a live stream that had already passed 60,000 concurrent viewers before his personal assistant finished reading him the incident summary. He had questions. He asked them one at a time. Dr. Alistair Penn answered them the same way. He did not perform. He did not catalog grievances or arrange his words for theatrical effect. He simply described what had occurred, in sequence, with the clinical precision of a man who had spent 31 years identifying the precise location of a blockage and was trained by temperament and discipline to name what he found without embellishment. Algernon Wicks had made a public accusation in the hotel lobby. Officer Rupert Gale had placed a hand on his forearm. 300 physicians had watched. The hotel's own marquee had been displaying his name in 8-inch letters through the front glass the entire time. Reginald Booker Smythe was quiet for a moment. After that last detail, Dr. Alistair Penn let the silence stand. When Reginald Booker Smythe asked who he was speaking with, not as a challenge, but as a man trying to understand the full weight of what he was holding, Dr. Alistair Penn answered that question too, though he noted, with no particular emphasis, that the answer should not have been necessary before the lobby incident, was not necessary during it, and was not, in the strictest sense, the point of the conversation they were now having. Then, because Reginald Booker Smythe asked, he gave the record: Army Medical Corps, 2 deployments, a commendation for emergency cardiac intervention performed under active fire conditions in a forward operating base with a field kit and no anesthesiologist, on a soldier who had a 70% chance of dying on the table and did not. 31 years in academic and clinical cardiology, 17 peer-reviewed publications, 4 of which had been cited in the clinical guidelines that governed how cardiologists across this country treated ventricular failure, an NIH research directorship he had held for 6 years, a wing of the Caldwell Medical School that bore his family name, endowed following a $12 million gift he made after his mother died of a preventable arrhythmia because the nearest cardiologist was 40 miles from where she lived. He had never told any of this to Algernon Wicks. He said that plainly, without drama. He had never told Algernon Wicks any of it, because none of it should have been required. A man standing in a hotel lobby, wearing a valid conference badge, name on the marquee, registered as a guest since the previous morning, does not owe the manager of that hotel a recitation of his service record to justify his presence in the building. The question of who he was had never been the operative question. The operative question, the one Reginald Booker Smythe needed to sit with, was what kind of institution permitted its manager to look at a man, look past the badge on that man's chest, and decide, on the basis of something that had nothing to do with the badge, that the man did not belong there. Reginald Booker Smythe did not push back. He said he understood. He said that was exactly what he intended to address, beginning this afternoon. He asked if Dr. Alistair Penn would be willing to receive a formal written communication from the ownership group before the evening concluded. Dr. Alistair Penn said he would. He thanked Reginald Booker Smythe for his time, and the call ended. He lowered the phone and stood for a moment in the corridor's quiet, the afternoon light still falling across his shoulders, and he breathed once, slowly, the way a man breathes when he has been carrying something upright for a long time and has not yet set it down, but has at least acknowledged its weight. His phone vibrated. A message from Nathaniel Voss, the journalist who had been quietly at the lobby side table, laptop open the entire time. The message contained a link and 4 words. It just went live. Dr. Alistair Penn opened the link and read the headline without expression. Hotel detains keynote cardiologist in own lobby while his name plays on marquee outside. Below it, in the subheading, a quote from Dr. Renata Osei Boateng. I have attended 41 medical conferences in my career. I have never witnessed anything like what I witnessed in that lobby today. And I want to be precise, I have never witnessed it happen to a white colleague. The article was thorough. It named the badge. It described the marquee. It named Algernon Wicks and Officer Rupert Gale. It described Officer Rupert Gale's hand closing on Dr. Alistair Penn's forearm in full view of the registration hall. Within the time it took Dr. Alistair Penn to read it to its final paragraph, his phone had accumulated 11 new notifications. 4 national outlets had already picked it up. The story had found the shape stories find when the evidence is too specific and too visible to be reframed. He pocketed the phone and turned from the window. Dorothea Stanwick was standing at the corridor entrance. She was wearing the same orange blouse and navy slacks she had worn in the lobby, but the pearl necklace had been straightened and she had taken some care with her expression, working it into something she intended to read as remorse. She held her clutch in both hands at her waist. She had clearly rehearsed what she was about to say, or had spent the last several minutes assembling it, and the assembly showed it was a structure built for an audience. For the phone she suspected was still recording somewhere. For the downstream consequence she had just fully calculated when the live stream counter climbed past 60,000 and her name appeared in a national article's third paragraph. She said she owed him an apology. She said she should not have spoken as she had. She said she had been concerned. She was always concerned during large events. The hotel drew all manner of people. She had not intended to cause harm. She had simply relied on the judgment of the hotel staff, and in retrospect, she could see that the situation was handled very poorly, and she was genuinely, sincerely sorry for any distress that she had contributed to. Dr. Alistair Penn listened to every word of it. He let her finish completely, without interrupting, which was either generosity or its own form of precision, letting something unspool far enough to reveal its entire shape before responding to it. When she was done, he was quiet for a single beat, and then he said, simply, "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Stanwick." He did not say he accepted the apology. He did not say he did not. He thanked her for it the way you acknowledge a thing that has been placed in front of you and does not quite fit what the occasion required. And he let that stand. Dorothea Stanwick had expected something different. She had expected either the absolution that would let her leave the corridor feeling lighter, or the confrontation that would let her feel wronged. He gave her neither. He simply thanked her and waited, with entire composure, until she understood that the conversation was finished. She nodded once and left the corridor. Dr. Alistair Penn straightened his lapel, adjusted the lanyard so the badge lay flat against his chest, and walked back toward the lobby. The space had shifted in register since he had stepped into the side corridor. The physician crowd had largely returned toward the registration hall, though small clusters remained near the front desk, speaking in the low, careful tones of people who understood they had witnessed something that would be discussed for longer than this afternoon. The velvet chairs near the entrance were vacant. The marble floors held the same overhead light from the lobby's wide skylights. Noon still bright even as mid-afternoon had settled in. Clean, overhead fluorescent light along the desk bank, mixing with the natural light that poured through the atrium, casting no shadows that could be conveniently misread. Celeste Drummond was still at the front desk. She had not been relieved. She had not been reassigned. She stood behind the desk in her dark blazer and cream blouse, her ID clipped to her lapel, her posture entirely composed in the professional sense. The way composure looks when it is covering something that has had a long, difficult day. She saw Dr. Alistair Penn the moment he came around the corridor turn. Her eyes found the badge first, then his face, and her expression moved through several things in quick succession before it arrived, simply, at what it actually was. She looked at him, and she mouthed two words, slowly and clearly, so there could be no question about them. "I'm sorry." Not a performance, not a calculation, not the managed regret of a woman who had read the article and was now revising her position in light of new information. She had known his name since the previous morning. She had checked him in herself. She had watched what happened in this lobby from 12 feet away, and she had been afraid, and she had found her voice too late, and she knew it. Dr. Alistair Penn looked at her across the lobby, across the marble, and the light and the long, terrible morning, now settling into afternoon, and he nodded once. One nod, small, deliberate, and exact. It cost him nothing. It meant everything to her. He walked past the desk, past the front entrance where the marquee was still visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. His name still lit, still 8 inches tall, still entirely unbothered by everything that had tried to contradict it, and he moved toward the elevator bank, badge against his chest, carrying only himself. The email from Reginald Booker Smythe's corporate office arrived at 4:57 in the afternoon, and it was not a suggestion. It was sent to Algernon Wicks's company account, copied to the Grand Hartwell's regional director, the parent hospitality group's legal counsel, and the Human Resources Division of Hartwell Premier Properties, LLC. The subject line read, "Administrative suspension, immediate effect." The body of the email was 4 sentences long. Algernon Wicks read it 3 times at his desk in the lobby manager's office, the door open at Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng's earlier insistence, the afternoon light from the corridor window falling in a flat, unsparing line across his desk. His charcoal vest was wrinkled now, in a way it had not been at noon. His hands, which had been so certain when they crossed against his chest in the lobby, sat very still against the desktop, as though he was afraid of what they might do if he let them move. The 4th sentence of the email informed him that his building access card would be deactivated at 6 p.m. He had 1 hour and 3 minutes. He did not call anyone. There was no one to call who did not already know. 2 floors below street level, in the secured parking structure beneath the Grand Hartwell, Deputy Chief Leonard Voss sat in the driver's seat of his department vehicle, with the engine idling and the windows up. Officer Rupert Gale sat in the passenger seat, short-sleeved uniform now carrying the particular wrinkled fatigue of a shift that had gone badly wrong hours before it was supposed to end. The conversation between them was not recorded, but its content would be reduced to a formal memorandum before nightfall and placed into the conduct review file that Leonard Voss had already opened on his department laptop in the lobby before he walked Rupert Gale down to the garage. Leonard Voss was in his blue jacket, dark trousers, and he spoke with the measured, deliberate diction of a man who had been in exactly this position before and found no version of it comfortable. He told Officer Rupert Gale that the department's body camera footage had already been reviewed. He told him that the live stream footage, which was now archived across multiple platforms and had been downloaded by at least 3 news organizations, constituted an independent visual record. He told him that the phrase he had used in the lobby, the phrase about what happened next being Rupert Gale's decision, would be addressed in the formal review. He told him to retain personal legal counsel. He did not say any of this with cruelty. He said it the way physicians deliver a diagnosis, because the truth, delivered clearly, is the only thing that gives someone a chance to respond to it honestly. Officer Rupert Gale stared at the concrete wall of the parking structure and said nothing for a long time. Then he said he had believed Algernon Wicks. Leonard Voss looked at him. He said that the belief was visible on the footage and that it was going to be examined carefully, and that believing a man who is wrong does not dissolve responsibility. It only explains its origin. The idling engine filled the silence between them. Outside, the city moved at its ordinary speed, entirely unaware of the 2 men in the parked car, aware of nothing except that a badge and a claim and a lobby had converged that afternoon, and that 300 witnesses, 40,000 live viewers, and a published article had turned the whole thing into something that could not be unfiled. On the 4th floor of the Grand Hartwell, in a suite she had paid a premium rate to occupy, Dr. Renata Osei-Boateng sat at the room's writing desk in her green blazer over cream blouse with dark trousers, her rolling bag still packed near the door because she had not yet had time to unpack it. Her laptop was open. The document on her screen was addressed to the Vice President of Event Services at Hartwell Premier Properties, LLC, and copied to the National Cardiovascular Medicine Conference's Board of Directors, the conference's legal representative, and the Hospitality Group's Diversity and Inclusion Office. She had been working on it for 40 minutes. It was not an angry letter. It was a precise one. It cited the events of that afternoon with time-stamped accuracy, referenced the names of 7 witnesses, attached 3 screenshots from the live stream, and included, in a section she had written with particular care, a summary of 4 prior incidents reported by Black and Brown physicians at Grand Hartwell Properties over the previous 3 years, incidents that had been submitted to the property's management, logged, and not escalated. She had found those prior complaints through 2 phone calls to colleagues she trusted, placed between the lobby confrontation and this moment. The pattern was not difficult to find. It had simply never been assembled in one document before. She saved the draft, read it from the beginning once more, and pressed send. The timestamp read 5:22 p.m. Down the hall, in a smaller room, with a window that faced the conference center's glass atrium, Dr. Edmund Nakamura had his NIH-issued laptop open and was composing a letter addressed to the NIH director. His gray suit jacket was folded over the back of his chair. He was writing in the formal register of federal correspondence, careful, substantive, and entirely without drama, noting that the afternoon's incident at the Grand Hartwell had occurred at a federally co-sponsored medical conference, that the keynote speaker had been a recipient of NIH research funding for 11 consecutive years, that the incident had been captured on a live stream that was now a matter of public record, and that the Conference Planning Committee for federally funded medical events should develop formal venue selection criteria that included documented management practices around racial equity in guest treatment. He did not use inflammatory language. He did not need to. The institutional weight of the letter was in the stationery and the recipient, and the 3 attachments he included: Nathaniel Voss's published article, the live stream archive link, and Dr. Renata Ose Boateng's conference complaint, which she had forwarded to him before he began writing. He signed it electronically, submitted it through the NIH's internal communications portal, and sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who knows the difference between a thing that will be read tomorrow and a thing that will be read tonight. Nathaniel Voss had not left the Grand Hartwell lobby. He was still at the side table near the window, his laptop open, his recorder on, and across from him sat 3 physicians who had agreed to be named on the record. One was a neurologist from Baltimore who described being turned away from a hotel registration desk at a radiology conference in Phoenix 2 years prior, told the conference badge he wore was not sufficient identification, and asked to produce a government-issued ID, while his white colleague, standing directly beside him, was waved through without question. The second was a surgical resident from Chicago who described being followed through a hotel corridor by a security guard at a cardiology symposium in Atlanta, and asked to show her room key despite wearing a conference lanyard. The third was a senior oncologist who described being told at a medical conference in Boston that the keynote speaker suite had already been allocated when his name was on the program. Nathaniel Voss listened to all 3 of them with his recorder running and his pen moving. He asked each of them the same final question: "Did you file a complaint?" The neurologist said he had, and nothing happened. The surgical resident said she had, and was told the guard was only following protocol. The oncologist said he had not, because he had not believed anything would happen if he did. Nathaniel Voss typed for a long time after they left. The second article, published at 6:15 p.m., the headline read, "Conference Incident Exposes Pattern, Doctors Say." Within 40 minutes, it had been picked up by 8 national outlets. The live stream archive link was embedded in every version. On the 14th floor, in room 1408, Dorothea Stanwick's phone rang at 5:48. The screen said Claire. She picked up on the second ring, and the conversation lasted 4 minutes. Her daughter Claire did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She asked her mother if the woman in Nathaniel Voss's article was her, and Dorothea Stanwick said it was complicated, and Claire said that it did not read as complicated, and that Dorothea's name was in the 4th paragraph, alongside a direct quotation that Dorothea had apparently delivered in a hotel lobby in front of 300 people and a live camera. Claire asked if that was accurate. Dorothea said she had meant to be helpful. Claire said that the women in her professional network were already texting her about it. The call ended without warmth, and the room was very quiet afterward. Dorothea Stanwick set her phone face down on the side table and looked at the orange blouse she had folded over the armchair, and did not move for a long time. Outside the Grand Hartwell's main entrance, In the natural light of early evening, Terence Holloway stood on the sidewalk in his green jacket over a white shirt and dark trousers. A local television crew's camera directed at him. He was not nervous. He had rehearsed nothing. When the reporter asked him what he had witnessed, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I watched him stand there for 22 minutes. He never raised his voice once. He just stood there and waited for the truth to catch up with the room. He had every reason to be angry, and he chose something harder than anger. That took more courage than anything I have seen in this lobby, and I have worked here 9 years." The television crew thanked him. He nodded, turned, and walked back through the entrance doors without looking at the camera again. At 6:44 p.m., the doors of the Grand Hartwell's Grand Ballroom opened, and 300 physicians moved inside, their voices filling the high-ceilinged space with the particular warm noise of a gathering that has been through something together and arrived somewhere on the other side. The conference had not been cancelled. It had not been moved. Not one scheduled event had been altered by so much as a minute. Every panel, every registration session, every breakout discussion had proceeded in its time, in its place, as though the institution of medicine had looked at what happened in the lobby and decided, quietly and collectively, that the answer was to stay and fill the room. Dr. Alistair Penn walked the long corridor that led from the guest elevator bank toward the stage entrance of the Grand Ballroom. He walked alone. His carry-on was in room 11408. His badge hung against his chest, keynote speaker in red, his full name in block letters, the conference seal catching the corridor's overhead fluorescent light with each step. He did not walk quickly. He did not walk slowly. He walked with the steady, unborrowed cadence of a man who has always known where he was going and has simply arrived. The Grand Hartwell's ballroom went up in 1931. Senators had spoken in it. 3 governors, 1 president, more symphony orchestras than anyone had bothered to count. The chandeliers were original, 12 tiers of hand-cut crystal that broke the light into pieces and threw it around the room. 40-foot ceiling, white tablecloths, gold chairs. Tonight, not an empty seat in the place. Dr. Alistair Penn waited in the corridor by the stage entrance. Green blazer over a white shirt, dark trousers, his conference lanyard still hanging around his neck. He hadn't taken it off all day, and he wasn't going to. Through the door he could hear them, 300 physicians finding their seats, water glasses, the low hum of a crowd that had been through something together and didn't have a name for it yet. Dr. Renata Ose-Boateng came up beside him. She looked exactly the way she'd looked in the lobby. Same blazer, same cream blouse, same trousers. She'd crossed that lobby in 12 seconds earlier and changed the weather of the day. She didn't say anything to him now, just stood there for a moment, then pulled the door open. The first sound out of the room wasn't applause. It was the thing that comes before applause, when a crowd notices at the same time. One person stood up, then a handful, then the whole room was on its feet, and the noise broke. Penn walked to the podium. He didn't hurry. 31 years in cardiology will teach you that urgency and speed are not the same thing, that the steadiest hand is usually the one you want. He took the stage at his own pace and let the applause run its course, because cutting it short would have been an insult to the people making it. These were his colleagues. They'd seen what happened in the lobby, and they were telling him so in the only way a crowd knows how. He set his notes on the podium. He glanced at them once. After that, he didn't. The room sat. The room went quiet. The chandelier light came down full on him, and he spoke. 40,000 Americans die every week from cardiovascular disease. His voice was level. He'd been delivering bad news in hard rooms for 3 decades, and somewhere in there he'd learned that the most useful thing a voice can do is hold. 40,000 every week, most of them in communities that have the least access to the kind of specialist standing at this podium. I want you to hold that number. Don't let it slide into the abstract. Hold it the way you'd hold a chart when something in it isn't adding up. Nobody moved. I've been working on this address for 8 months, he said, and I intend to deliver every word of it. But before I do, I want to talk about what happened today. Not because I'm angry. I want to be careful about that. I'm not angry. Anger is the wrong tool for what I'm about to describe. What I'm about to describe needs the same precision I'd use to find the exact spot of an arterial blockage, because that's what it is. Not one person in that room moved. This morning, I was detained in the lobby of this hotel by a police officer, at the request of the hotel's general manager, who was encouraged by a hotel guest. I was told, in language that did not leave much room for interpretation, that I did not belong here. My conference badge was visible. My name was on the marquee outside, in letters 8 inches tall. None of that was consulted before the determination was made. He paused. He let it settle. I want to tell you what that costs. Not what it cost me. What it costs. There's a boy somewhere in this country, or there was, with the aptitude and the drive and the particular kind of mind cardiology needs. Maybe he got turned away at a door. Maybe someone with authority looked at him and ran the same math that got run on me in that lobby this morning. And the boy felt it and decided it wasn't worth the trouble, that the door would always close faster than he could open it. His hands rested on the podium. We won't know his name. He won't turn up in any study. But the 40,000 who die every week, the towns that can't get a specialist on the phone, the outcomes data none of us sleep through, those numbers come from somewhere, and it isn't always a disease. Sometimes it's a lobby. The room didn't move. He picked up his notes and set them aside. Anyway, he said, the heart. And he gave the talk, the whole 62 minutes of it. Rural mortality, access gaps, the protocols his group had published that spring. He spoke like someone who had earned the words, and the room listened the way rooms listen after they've watched someone keep their footing. When he finished, the audience stood again. The first ovation had been solidarity. This one wasn't, exactly. He wasn't sure what to call it. He nodded and walked off. The corridor back was empty. He passed the hallway where he'd taken the call. He passed the manager's office, dark now. The lobby was quiet. Chairs empty. Desk unstaffed. Skylight black. He went out the front doors. It was cool out. Taxis went by. The city didn't know and didn't owe him knowing. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked up. The marquee was still lit. His name in white. He read it through once. Then he called his daughter. She picked up on the second ring. Dad, are you? I'm okay. I'm outside. I saw it. I saw it. I gave the talk. It went fine. A pause. He heard her breathe out. Come home tomorrow morning. I'll tell you then. He stood there another second under his lit-up name, then put the phone away and went back inside. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.